So, 2 years later, and I'm finally adding a fourth video to my PSA playlist. Now, of course, this is because I thought that playlist was done. But, long story short, the book that I mentioned at the end of one of those videos that was coming out is now, 2 years later, about to come out. And while working on that book, I realized that I was wrong about PSA. I believed and taught you guys in that playlist that PSA and Christus Victor were compatible. One was the what of the gospel and the other was the how of the gospel. But since then, I have discovered that PSA and Christus Victor are not compatible. In fact, they are diametrically opposed. And it's not because of the 4 questions that we talked about in those earlier videos. It comes down to the document nailed to the cross in Colossians 2:14. There is a document that God nails to the cross. And in the Christus Victor view of the atonement, it's one document. And in the PSA view of the atonement, it is a completely different document. It's not a different perspective of the document. It's a completely different document. And which atonement view is the correct view is going to come down to which document was nailed to the cross. So in this video, we're going to discuss the document, what the document nailed to the cross is in the Christus Victor view. Tomorrow's video, we will talk about the document nailed to the cross in the PSA video. And yes, I really do mean it. There is another video coming out tomorrow. In fact, there is a video coming out every Monday through Thursday of this entire month because this is Semper Reformanda month. And on October 31st, one of the books that I spent the last 2 years writing is coming out. And I'll explain at the end of this video why it's 2 books and not 1 book, because that's its own little story. So anyway, one of the reasons why I can come out with videos faster now is because ChatGPT said that the difference between a podcast and YouTube, a visual podcast, obviously not a radio podcast, but a visual podcast and a YouTube video is one is edited and has B-roll. A YouTube video is edited and has B-roll, and a podcast does not. So guess what? You're getting this video unedited. And podcasts have microphones. So see my microphone? This is a podcast, not a video. So yes. So hopefully you don't mind this. I would assume that it would be better to get more content out as quickly as possible than to try to make it all special. And I will actually try to go back to YouTube videos, but I am in the finalization of the 2 books and I can't learn something like DaVinci Resolve or something like that right now. So this is about as good as I can get right now, but at least I will be getting content out quickly. And after this month, it will be every Monday and Thursday. So it'll be twice a week, all the time, because I'm really, really, really excited to tell you guys what I have learned in the last 2 years and to equip you with all of that. So anyway, the document nailed to the cross in the Christus Victor view. So I had said that the document was Satan's inheritance. I said that he had inherited the nations, which he had, according to Deuteronomy 32:8, and that because he illegally killed Jesus, he had forfeited his inheritance, because as the Lord of Death in Hebrews 2:14, he only wielded the power of death over sinners. And of course, Jesus was sinless, so he had no right to orchestrate Jesus' death. So, because of that, he had forfeited his inheritance, and now Psalm 82:8, God could rise up and inherit the nations. Jesus is given all authority to infiltrate the nations with Christians indwelt with the Holy Spirit, his Father's presence, and all of that. But that's not, the early church has a slightly different nuance to that view. And so I was not only very wrong about PSA, which we will get into more tomorrow, but I was also slightly wrong about this aspect of Christus Victor, because the early church's nuance, the difference, is actually very important, and it ends up equipping us to understand why PSA and Christus Victor are not compatible. So in this video, I'm going to use the analogy of a mortgage. So when I said that Satan's inheritance was nailed to the cross, it's like saying that the deed to his mortgage was nailed to the cross. So let's say he owns a house at 666 Hades Drive. And in effect, I was saying that the deed is the document that was nailed to the cross. He forfeited his right to that mortgage. Now, the early church understood it a bit differently. They understood it not as Satan's inheritance of the nation, but Satan's proof of ownership of the nations. What do I mean by that? Okay, so there's 360 mortgage payments in a typical 30-year mortgage. Now, Satan collected that money from all the ethnic people groups. So using Ephesians 2 as an example, where it reads, I should have wrote a Bible. You were following the ways of the rulers of this world and gratifying the flesh, something like that. So using that as an example, one of Satan's mortgage payments would say, so the Egyptians worship me as Amun-Ra, elevating me to the god of Egypt and empowering me by gratifying the flesh. Another one says, the Greeks worship me as Zeus, elevating me to the god of Greece, empowering me because they gratify the flesh. The Romans worship me as Jupiter, elevating me to the god of Rome, etc., etc. And so because all the nations, because he had proof, all these receipts from every nation, he's the God of every nation, i.e. he's the God of the world, God of this age. Okay, so, except for Israel, of course, because Israel is Yahweh's. Now, you know how you can download a PDF of all your transactions into one document. That document, the record of every nation elevating Satan as their God through idolatry and empowering him and his angels with their sins, is what was nailed to the cross. It was his proof that he owned the nations, the record of sins that proved all humanity was his. Now, if you're wondering if I'm just bandying semantics here, the difference that it makes, whether it was the deed to 666 Hades Drive nailed to the cross, or whether it was the document showing 360 mortgage payments were made, comes down to what the word propitiation meant in the first century. It meant expiate, which means to wipe away. So basically what the early church believed is that the record of sins that bound all Gentile nations to Satan was blank. It was wiped blank. And that's why it's just nailed to the cross, this blank document that Satan doesn't have any proof now that he owns the nations. So it's not an inheritance that is null and void, the way I had worded it, but it's the proof of ownership that is completely blank. There's no writing on it. The irony here is that the reason it's wiped clean is because Jesus' shed blood wiped it away, and it's Satan who killed Jesus. So the function of sacrificial blood was to cleanse or wipe away sin. Leviticus 16:30 tells us the purpose of the Day of Atonement was to cleanse everything in God's territory from sin. It cleansed the altar, cleansed the people, cleansed the tabernacle, it cleansed the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant. It cleaned everything. And the book of Hebrews says that Jesus fulfilled the Day of Atonement. 1 John 1:9 says that if we confess our sins, Jesus, as our high priest, cleanses us from all unrighteousness. So both the Old and the New Testament demonstrate that sacrificial blood acts as a cleansing agent. So the reason this nuance is so important is because Satan himself killed Jesus illegally, which is why Jesus could defeat death that had no right to hold him. And this violent death of crucifixion that Satan orchestrated is the blood that wiped away all of Satan's proof of ownership. This is why the Bible says if Satan had realized what killing Jesus would accomplish, he never would have done it. Yeah, there's all that irony there. So because his killing Jesus basically wiped clean the record of sins that proved he owned the Gentiles. So in the analogy of marriage I used in the earlier videos, they were now free to divorce Satan and reconcile with Yahweh. In this analogy, they're now free to move out of 666 Hades Drive, and they can move to 777 Paradise Lane. Because even though they were bound to that house because of the deed and everything like that, there's no proof that they had anything to do with it. That they have anything to do with the owner of that house. There's just no proof of it anymore, so they're free to walk away. So that's kind of the nuance is it's ironic as well as very important and going to show how the early church understood what blood accomplished, what sacrifice accomplished, and what expiation meant. This is all very important. Okay, so that is the document nailed to the cross in the Christus Victor view. Tomorrow, we will talk about the document nailed to the cross in the PSA view. Now, one of the reasons why I'm going to do shorter videos, one concept per video, goes back to why I have been gone for 2 years. So 2 years, October 2023, I stopped doing videos because I started working on a book. I had an idea for a book that I thought would be very quick to come out. And it turned out that it took longer than I thought to finish. I finished it July 2023, and I sent it out to beta readers, and they basically couldn't understand it at all. And this is a book for Gen Z, okay? I sent it to a pastor, a retired pastor, who said, I'm going to have to read this again to understand what you're trying to say. So I'm like, okay, don't bother. I will rewrite it. And so I completely rewrote it completely from the ground up. So much so, I ended up doing this 4 times. 4 times I rewrote it and sent it out to beta readers. And each time it was rewritten so differently that literally the title changed, because I was reframing the same information from such a different perspective. I finally have a version that people understand. So I've simplified it. Enough. It's a deep book. We go really deep into hermeneutics and exegesis and things like that. The majority consensus is that it reads like a textbook. So most people, let alone Gen Z, probably doesn't enjoy reading textbooks. I do, but I'm apparently the exception to the rule. But whatever. Okay. The point is, I was able to write a fiction version, a short story version of the book, a very short story, and all the same beta readers love this version. They say it's a very easy read, very understandable. And so I finally have my Gen Z version. That book is coming out October 31st, the short story. It is called Door Number 3. I will put an image here. Hopefully I can figure out how to put an image there. If there is no image there, it's because I couldn't figure it out. And I will just disappear, and you will see the frame filled up with an image of the book. But for those who want the textbook, that one is coming out February 18th. And that one has, I think at last count, it has over 700 sources. It's deep. It's deep. You can't. So one is called Deconstruction Masterclass. The subtitle is A Biblical Refutation of Original Sin, Penal Substitution, Eternal Conscious Torment, and Other Evangelical Doctrines. And when I say it's a biblical refutation, I mean it. We go deep. We go deep into, basically we're following the literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutic that all evangelicals say is required to come up with correct doctrines. So they know this. They know that's the correct hermeneutic. And I agree with them. That is the correct hermeneutic. But if you use that hermeneutic, you cannot come up with penal substitution or eternal conscious torment or original sin. So, but we go pretty deep into literal versus metaphorical and metaphysical, and grammatical versus ungrammatical, and historical versus, by historical, we're talking theologically historical, semantically historical, and culturally historical, versus ahistoric and anachronistic. So, yeah. Now, everything in these books I will be talking about in YouTube. So there's no reason for anyone has to buy either book. But I know that some people will want it. Some people will want, all of the information at their fingertips with the sources and all of that. So they will be available for those who want it. But all the information I will be sharing on YouTube as quickly as I can. Like I said, I am dying to get this information out. I actually had a nervous breakdown last December because I couldn't get the book clear enough in such a way. This was before I got the idea for the short story, because I had been on deconstruction boards watching young person after young person abandoning the faith over these doctrines because they had been convinced that they had no intellectually honest option except atheism. If you reject PSA, you might as well be an atheist. And this is how much they're convinced the Bible teaches PSA. And the Bible only teaches PSA if you use an metaphorical, metaphysical, ungrammatical, ahistoric, anachronistic hermeneutic. And personally, I just don't think that's a very good hermeneutic to use. So my writing a book, it was like I was designing a life preserver that I thought that I knew would help them. It was the exact kind of life preserver that they needed to not drown. And they're drowning, and I have it, and I'm handing the schematics to the manufacturer of life preservers, and they're looking at it and saying to me, I don't know what this is, I can't make it. That's what it felt like every time they gave me my book back and said, no one's going to read this. It reads like a textbook. And I just broke because I just watching the people on the people on these boards just falling away for basically what's a lie. And I don't mean a lie as in, intentionally deceiving, but it is a lie. You have an intellectually honest option. It is not PSA or atheism. So anyway, shortly after that, I got the idea for the short story, and so now both are going to be coming out soon. But the point is, I do not even want to wait. I am so desperate to get this information out to whoever needs it that I am going to be releasing videos every single day this month, trying to get. Now, I mean, all the information I can't get out that much. Oh, so what I was trying to say is that's why it's one concept per video, because people told me how dense it is, and textbook. I feel like the best way to teach it in YouTube is to have a playlist per doctrine, but one concept per video. And so this way you can watch it at your own pace. If you come across this a month or a couple months from now and you want to binge watch it and you're, tracking, then that's great. But it's just an easy way to be able to digest one concept at a time. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. And some of you have noticed that some videos are gone. No, YouTube didn't take them down. I took them down because I realized that I am rebranding this entire channel. What I am going to be teaching you how to do is to deconstruct everything that you were ever taught. And I don't mean deconstruct and throw it away. I mean deconstruct as to, why do I believe this? Is this hermeneutically and exegetically sound? And if it's not, then we do demolition. So you don't do people think deconstruction and demolition is the same thing. It's not. Deconstruction is looking behind the walls to see what studs are being used. You can do that carefully. You can do it with a sledgehammer, and then, yeah, you're not going to be able to put it back up together. But if you just want to see, was this wall constructed properly? Is the stud correct? So you carefully remove the wall, and you look at the stud. If the stud is correct, if the stud is using a literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutic, if the stud is using exegesis and not eisegesis, then yes, we will put the wall back. But if the stud is wrong, if the hermeneutic is metaphorical, metaphysical, ungrammatical, ahistoric, and anachronistic, then it's got to come down. So yes, then we will do demolition. And we will put the correct stud up, and the wall that we replace it with will be whatever that hermeneutic dictates. So it's our hermeneutic that will dictate our doctrine. It's not our doctrine that forces a hermeneutic, because if your doctrine forces a metaphorical, metaphysical, ungrammatical, ahistoric, anachronistic hermeneutic, then there's something wrong with your doctrine. So that's what this channel is going to be rebranded as. And so I just basically wanted to start from scratch, and I wanted to start with PSA. So I left that playlist up, even though I knew I had said wrong things in it. The 4 questions are still correct. That Satan inherited the nations and that he illegally killed Jesus, like all of that was correct. I think pretty much the only thing that was wrong was how to word the document nailed to the cross, and of course that PSA is not the what or the how, or however I worded that. It's not compatible, and so we will look at that more tomorrow. So until then, keep standing firm and no drowning. See you then.